Early morning at the couple's quiet home. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the modest kitchen. Sarah stood at the counter, stirring sugar into her tea with a mechanical rhythm. Across the table, David sat hunched over a newspaper, though he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the same headline for several minutes, his mind elsewhere. The house was silent, save for the quiet ticking of the clock and the occasional clink of silverware against porcelain. It was a routine they had lived for years, waking, sharing a meal, and moving through their day with a heaviness they didn't need to speak about anymore. Sarah glanced at the calendar on the wall. Today marked what would have been her due date, 2 years ago. Another lost pregnancy. Another silent anniversary. She pressed her lips together and took a slow breath, blinking away the memory. David looked up briefly and gave her a small, tired smile. She tried to return it, but it faded before it could reach her eyes. Then, suddenly, a faint sound. Both froze. A soft, high-pitched cry, barely audible through the thick front door. David set his coffee down, brow furrowed. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, already halfway out of her chair. The sound came again, clearer this time. A baby. No, more than one. Her heart began to pound as she moved quickly toward the door. David followed, confused and alert. As Sarah pulled open the front door, the early morning breeze met her face, but it was what lay on the porch that stole her breath. A wicker basket. 3 tiny, bundled newborns inside. And a note resting delicately atop them. "You need them more than I do." Front porch of the couple's home, moments later. Sarah's hand trembled as it hovered over the basket, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The newborns, 3 of them, were tightly swaddled in soft, mismatched blankets, their tiny faces pink and peaceful despite the early morning chill. One of them stirred, letting out a small whimper. Another hiccuped. David stepped forward slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh my God," he whispered, crouching beside the basket. He looked up at Sarah, who stood frozen, hand covering her mouth. They're real." He reached gently into the basket and touched the hand of one of the infants. It curled instinctively around his finger, and something in his chest cracked open, raw, sudden, and overwhelming. Sarah finally knelt beside him, her eyes darting between each baby, trying to understand what she was seeing. Then she noticed the note tucked neatly beneath the smallest one's blanket. With shaking fingers, she unfolded it. The handwriting was rushed but careful. "You need them more than I do." Just 8 words, but they hit her like a thunderclap. David read it over her shoulder and exhaled sharply, blinking back emotion. "Who would do this?" he said, scanning the street as if the mystery parent might still be nearby, watching. But the neighborhood was still. Silent. Sarah looked back at the babies. "They're just hours old," she whispered. "They couldn't have been out here long." David took out his phone. "We need to call someone, police, social services." But neither moved right away. For a long, quiet moment, they simply stared at the basket, at this impossible, miraculous gift, unsure if they were dreaming, or if the universe had just answered a prayer in the most unexpected way imaginable. Inside the couple's home, shortly after discovering the triplets. The living room, once silent and sterile, now buzzed with the soft cries and coos of newborn life. Sarah sat on the floor, surrounded by the triplets, carefully cradling one in her arms while the other 2 lay safely nestled in a warm blanket beside her. Her movements were instinctual, gentle rocking, soothing hums, as if her body remembered a role it had never truly been allowed to play. David stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low but urgent. "Yes, 3 of them. Yes, newborns. They were left on our porch." A note was attached. He paused, listening. "No, we didn't see anyone. No cameras, not that we know of. Please, just send someone." He ended the call, lowering the phone with a heavy sigh. Sarah looked up. What did they say? They're sending the police and a social worker. Said we need to keep them warm and fed. Someone will be here soon. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving the tiny face nestled in her arms. The baby yawned and curled closer to her chest. They're so small, she murmured. So perfect. Who would? She stopped, unable to finish the thought. David knelt beside her and touched the baby's soft cheek. I don't know. But whoever left them, they must have been watching us. Somehow, they knew. The doorbell rang, startling them both. The moment of quiet awe broke, replaced by the sharp awareness that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah clutched the baby a little closer. What if they take them away? David met her gaze, uncertain, but determined. Then we fight. Whatever it takes. Because deep down, in just minutes, the couple who once believed their home would always be empty now knew what it was like to feel full. Police station and social services office, days later. The room was quiet, clinical, and filled with fluorescent light. Sarah and David sat side by side across from a child welfare officer, their fingers tightly entwined. Despite the exhaustion on their faces, sleepless nights filled with bottles, diapers, and worry, there was a fragile hope in their eyes. A social worker, Ms. Rivera, closed a file and looked up. We've named them Baby A, B, and C for now, she said softly. They're healthy. Full term. No signs of neglect or harm. Whoever left them, took care of them. Sarah blinked quickly, her voice a whisper. So there's no sign of the mother. Detective Carson, seated nearby, shook his head. We canvassed the neighborhood, checked nearby hospitals and clinics. No one reported a missing baby, let alone 3. No security footage. No fingerprints on the note or the basket. It's like she vanished. David leaned forward. But there was a reason she chose us. That note, she must have known our story. Ms. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. Infertility support groups, adoption forums, even social media. If you've shared your journey publicly at any point. Flash to a dim hospital room. A young woman sits on the edge of a bed, cradling 3 newborns. Her face is pale, eyes heavy with fear and sorrow. She watches a video on her phone, Sarah and David, speaking at a fertility awareness fundraiser. Their story, their pain, their love, raw and real. Tears stream down her cheeks as she kisses each baby goodbye. She quietly wraps them in blankets, places them in the basket, and disappears into the early dawn. Back in the present, Sarah wipes a tear away. If she left them with us, maybe she believed we could give them what she couldn't. The detective nods. Or maybe she was giving herself a chance to let go, with love, not shame. The mystery remains unsolved. But in the silence that follows, something becomes clear: this wasn't abandonment, it was a desperate act of faith. A sunlit park, 6 months later. Laughter echoed across the open field as children played, birds sang, and families gathered under the warm afternoon sun. A soft breeze rustled the trees overhead, and somewhere nearby, a baby squealed with delight. Sarah sat on a checkered picnic blanket beneath a shady oak, gently rocking one of the triplets in her arms. The baby wore a tiny sun hat, her chubby fingers clutching Sarah's shirt as if it were a lifeline. Next to her, David crouched beside a double stroller, carefully adjusting the straps on the other 2, both giggling and kicking their legs in excitement. They were bigger now, stronger, louder, more full of life. Gone were the thin cries and fragile limbs. The triplets had grown into joyful, thriving babies, and so had the couple who once thought they'd never know this kind of happiness. Friends passed by and waved, some stopping to coo at the babies or offer warm congratulations. The news had spread through the town like wildfire, the miracle on Maple Street, they called it. No one ever came forward to claim the children, and after months of home studies, background checks, and legal procedures, the adoption had finally been made official. David reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a small, framed note. He handed it to Sarah with a soft smile. "You need them more than I do." The paper was yellowed at the edges, preserved behind glass. Sarah looked at it, her eyes misting with quiet gratitude. "We do," she whispered. "And we always will." David kissed her forehead and sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as the triplets gurgled and babbled in harmony. They weren't just parents now. They were a family, built not by biology, but by love, fate, and the courage of a mother they would never forget.